Designers are supposed to iterate, but the way you iterate is you start not with one idea, you start with like 100 ideas.
It's so easy to come up with shiny objects, right, or new ideas to run around and waste time on actually implementing. And do you actually understand what you're trying to solve?
Designers kind of need to become archivists and historians, and you need to create a body of evidence that proves that the way we're doing things today is not working.
There's so much pressure from internal stakeholders that actually you've got to deliver things that please them rather than the customer, but they think by doing that you're delivering the right thing for the customer, but you're actually causing more issues.
Foundation of Business Strategy by Michael Porter. What can we profitably offer which customers need and which competitors will find hard to imitate? If you can do that, you can do those three things, you're in the money. You're gonna make cash.
Pavel Samsonov is a design lead at AWS and an expert in UX, product innovation, and human-computer interaction. He promotes a content-first approach to UX design and was a product manager at Bloomberg. Pavel is also an active speaker and thought leader in the design community. Join us for our conversation with Pavel Samsonov.
Well, welcome to the podcast, Pavel. It's great to have you on, and appreciate you taking the time. We've been having a bit of a back and forth chat, so looking forward to our discussion today.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. Excited to get into our conversation.
Awesome. So give us a bit of background. Maybe if we jump straight in, just give us a bit of background about yourself and your career to date, and we could go from there. I know you do quite a bit at AWS, etc., and you've got quite a bit of experience. So.
Yeah, absolutely. So like you said, most recently, I'm a design architect at Amazon Web Services. Essentially, what a design architect is, it's like a UX designer that you're used to, but much more leaning heavily on the earlier part of that process, defining the conceptual fidelity of the product. I do a lot of information architecture. I do a lot of user research, a lot of storyboarding, actually, a lot of like low fidelity prototyping, wireframing, things like that, helping AWS customers innovate the way that Amazon innovates. So the emphasis is really on how do we actually use design as a tool for decision making, as a tool for creating clarity, and not so much on the high polish Figma kind of handoff to developers stage. Not that I don't get to do that, but it's kind of like the last 10% of the work is the last mile problem, as we say at Amazon, rather than the focus of my role. Before that, I was at Bloomberg, kind of in a hybrid role between a product manager and a designer. When Bloomberg Enterprise was still kind of building out its design organization, there was no one else to do that, and so I was hired to be a designer, and took on the product management role as well. Before that, I was in the startup world, working a bit on AI ML, back when it was AI ML, not just AI. Kind of a bit of a chaotic experience. I did a lot of front end development myself as well. A lot of the time in that kind of environment, especially when you're in a B2B or an enterprise kind of situation, you've got Java developers or backend developers, and kind of someone pulls a short straw and they're like, you're doing UI today, and they're not used to it, and so I was kind of picking up that slack. And before that was my grad school, so I went to Carnegie Mellon for human computer interaction, and before that I was in Canada doing bachelor's of design, which was really an interesting program, because this was back in, like, I graduated in 2013 from that program. And so design really was just only taking off as, here's a thing that is mostly digital. We did a lot of graphic design, a lot of sketching, a lot of typography, things that you don't really see in this kind of programs anymore. We had actual LED type setting machines in the studio. We had vinyl cutters, things like that. There was a packaging design program. Like, it was really tactical and tactile. And it's interesting to kind of go from that mindset to, I want to do the web stuff. I want to do interaction. I want to do UX, and seeing that the logic, the way that you approach it, the design process, it's exactly the same. It's exactly the same. And a lot of people who are kind of entering design now, whether they're um, you know pivoting from some other field, they're going to boot camps, they're doing things that kind of try to shortcut that. They don't necessarily get that kind of here's the design process background. So the way that I approach my practice is I've been accused frequently of being too academic, whatever that means. Um, I would say that I think I'm the right amount of academic, because everything that we do, it needs to have a structure behind it. It needs to have some kind of theory of why do we do things the way that we do things, and what if we did them differently? Like, are what we're are sorry, is what we're doing actually getting us to the goals that we have? And did we actually remember to set goals for ourselves, or did we just start doing something for the sake of doing it, for the sake of action, for the sake of, build, measure, learn, without really stopping to think, well, why are we doing this? So I can get a little bit into the weeds sometimes with things like that, but I think that um, it's an approach that this field could use for sure.
Yeah, I agree. And basically, uh, what I say to people as well when we're building a thing or with products, etc., is like, why are we doing this? Right? Always challenging why, like why are we doing this? We should have a reason for it. And I agree with that. There's got to be some reason behind it. I want to jump into some of the common mistakes you see, like in product development or design, kind of overall. And you're obviously involved very early on in the process, but you've got experience across the entire design process. But one of the things I know we've discussed quite a bit, and we've had a bit of a discussion about already as well, but is building things that you want to build rather than actually solving genuine customer problems or delivering features that are going to deliver real value in the end. And I know, a lot of your work, and you mentioned, etc., things around, bad product teams essentially are just trying to find things to solve or to fix that aren't really actually doing anything for the customer.
Yeah, I think that is honestly something that comes directly out of this build first approach. And in a way, Silicon Valley has valorized this builder culture, but it's waste culture. It's wasteful. When you start looking for somewhere which you can plug in your feature. You came up with an idea for a feature, and then you just went and you wanted to build it, and it's kind of like, instead of double diamond, it's double square. There's only two check boxes. Did we come up with the idea? Yes, check. Did we build it? Check. That's it. We're done. There's no real sense of what did we do it for, and there's not even a sense of, was this the best way to solve this problem. So one of the things that really stuck with me all the way back from the first year of my graphic design program is, designers are supposed to iterate, but the way you iterate is you start not with one idea, you start with like 100 ideas. And when you have 100 ideas, none of them are precious, because you can look at what are the user needs, what are the opportunities in this space. You come up with lots and lots and lots of different ideas, and you test them. You see, is this an opportunity where we can actually deliver value? No, not a big deal. I got 99 more ideas. Is this the best way to deliver this experience to the customer? Is this the best way to actually help them get to their goal? No, big deal. I got 98 more ideas. It's
Yeah.
like, you don't feel like they're your darlings when you have one idea. And usually the way that idea comes about is you're scrolling on Instagram, you're scrolling on Amazon, you're scrolling on some popular website, and you see, oh, that's a cool feature. We should have that on my website. And then you go to your Jira backlog and you add this, hey, we should have this feature. And that's your only idea. It's your precious baby. When anyone says we don't need this, it's not going to help. When anyone says we have this other idea we want to do, you feel personally attacked because you've got nothing else going on. You don't.
Yeah.
It's not rooted in an understanding of the customer need. It's rooted in this thing you came up with. So it kind of creates this impasse where, if you haven't done the ideation work, if you haven't done the research, if you haven't done that cycle of what if, let's try something, let's see what kind of magnitude of impact we can get or what kind of traction we can get with our customers, then you're never going to move beyond the point where you're just building ideas because they sound cool.
Yeah.
And when you're stuck in that loop, you're going to butt heads with other people who have ideas that are not your idea, who have a different understanding of what sounds cool. And in, your typical product team where you have a product manager with the business at their back, the people who notionally at least think in terms of how much money this is going to make for us. And you have the development lead with an engineering team behind them and an org that's all about how do we put something out into production? How do we build more quickly? How do we make this actually work and stable and sustainable? And then you have the
Yeah.
designer. The designer doesn't have anyone at their back. The designer might have a design org if you're lucky. Most likely, all you have is design ops and like a design system team. And those people aren't gonna, they're not in your corner in that sense. They're not gonna fight for you. And so what happens if you're not rooting the things you're building in this kind of customer benefit and this kind of multi-ideation, you get people fighting over, well, we're going to do this cool thing that the business wants. Well, we want to do this cool
100%.
thing that engineering wants. And that's not how a team works. That's how a working group works, is you kind of have this argument over, well, we're going to prioritize. And what does that mean? It means that we're going to split our sprint into half of it are the features the business wants to build because they think it's going to make us more money, and half of it is what the developers want to do because they think it's going to stop our website from falling over. And somewhere in there, you might squeeze like, oh, we're going to change the icons, or we're going to do a visual refresh. But those are just, they're not customer problems. You're solving product problems, you're solving engineering problems, you're solving visual design problems. And the customer doesn't care about any of that stuff. There's a fantastic Christina Wodka article that came out, I think probably about 10 years ago at this point. It says, the title is, "Users don't hate change, they hate you." And I think that it's honestly a really good way of thinking about what are you actually doing? Are you helping people in a way that they recognize as help? Or are you just helping burnish your resume with, oh, I launched the redesign of the Facebook landing page? Well, did anyone ask for that? Probably not. But it sounds really cool. In tech, they call that resume-driven development. And you can kind of see that now. Every single website now has a chatbot attached to it, so that people who developed it can put, I developed a chatbot on the resume, and then they're going to go to their next job. They're going to be global head of AI at their next job because they developed this one chatbot, and they're going to build more chatbots. It's it's not a feature that didn't solve any problems. It solved their problem of not being paid enough money, but it didn't really solve a customer problem, and it wasn't built to solve a customer problem.
Yeah, I definitely agree, and I think a big part of this comes back to what you're talking about earlier, is the research, right, and validating our assumptions. With it's so easy to come up with shiny objects, right, or new ideas to run around and waste time on actually implementing. And we see, I've been through the process myself of learning that, if that makes sense, over time, and realizing and recognizing that all that really matters in the end, even if you deliver way less features, if you deliver value in regards to the users, you're going to get a heck of a lot. Like, you're going to get so much more back, if that makes sense. If you're building something that no one uses, great, it might look great, it might sound cool, but the users themselves are not actually using it, or it's not growing. Either if you're a SaaS company, obviously your annual recurring revenue or anything like that, or if you're actually delivering something through maybe a B2B side or something, or more enterprise, where it's more of an offering of what you're doing to the customer, but you're not in any way helping them. And I totally agree with you. I think the biggest issue is like coming up with ideas and just assuming we know the answer. Like, assuming first and foremost we know what ideas we should be working on, but then secondly, even when we come up with those ideas, have we validated them? And then if we even get them from customers, do we test them in different, in iterate as you discussed, and go back to them and say, is this what you were thinking? Right? Is this, is this in that direction of where you're trying to go? And I think is one of the things that we discussed about, like, assuming what users want without proper research. I don't know, diving in, like, how do you approach that research and validating those things with customers? Like, is that important in your perspective to do that?
Yeah, I mean, two things here. One thing is, I don't like the framing of validation. I usually try to avoid it in my work
Yep.
because when you start out with bias towards a particular idea, I think it's very easy to kind of hunt for evidence that you're right. You have 100 responses and 3 of them say this is cool, and then you put those quotes in your pitch deck and you say 3 people said this was cool,
Yep.
and you conveniently leave out the fact that 97 people didn't particularly care for it. So it's 100% important to uh, make sure your ideas make sense, make sure that the things you believe about your customers are true. But I think that you should do research even earlier than that. I think your ideas need to come from your research insights. Your ideas don't they shouldn't come from you yourself sitting kind of looking at your Jira backlog trying to think of what do I want to build next. They should come
Yeah.
from looking at what customers are doing, not even necessarily talking to them, but observing them, observing what they're trying to do, observing how they try and do it, talking to them afterwards. I think field research is, something that is missing from a lot of practices because it's hard, it's inconvenient, but you get so much richer data. You get an understanding of why people are doing things,
Agree.
and that means that you can go back to those people and ask them, well, you told me this, but you did this. And always what they're going to tell you is, oh, but this is a special case. And the special cases are exactly the things that you want, because in real life, nothing is generic. There's always some kind of special case. If everything was perfect, then you would only have that one kind of linear user journey. You most likely will not have a product that looks like that. You will have a product that has, all kinds of forking paths, errors, error recovery. People will try to skip around. People are going to try and skip your onboarding thing that pops up. If there's any kind of pop-up, they're going to close it. They won't read it. They'll go back to your website, once a year. They've forgotten how it works. They've forgotten their login. They just want to, do their taxes or something. And all those extra features that sounded really cool to you, and you might have even been able to validate them depending on the rigor of your testing. They just get in the way of that because no one remembers what they were for. Um, B2B is a really good example. There's a lot of stuff that I use at work, a lot of programs, and I do it like once a month. And every single time I go in, I do not remember what any of that stuff does because I have a specific task in mind, and the tool was built for 1,000 different tasks. And the way that happens is product managers talk to salespeople, but salespeople aren't researchers. Salespeople will tell you, oh yeah, people have said, a bunch of people have mentioned that they want this kind of feature or this kind of feature. And so you
Sales-driven
get,
development.
well, it's not wrong per se, but the problem comes when you have to quantify the impact. Because that's what a product manager should be doing, is they should not just be working on the next idea, they should be working on the most impactful next idea. And measuring the impact of that work when all you know is some people wanted this, it's really hard. And you get into these huge arguments that last weeks about prioritization. I think that when you have those arguments, it's a sign that you haven't actually talked to real customers. You don't have a sense of what they want. There's a concept that's about 15, 20 years old at this point that is slowly making its way into the mainstream called design futuring. And I'll give credit to Dorian Taylor for introducing me to it. He didn't come up with it, but we were talking about it the other day. The idea being that design is really useful at asking what if. And it's really good at doing that very cheaply. I mentioned storyboards earlier. Huge part of my job one of the things we do at the very beginning when we just have a client come to us and say, hey, we want to build this feature, we have this problem, is we do up a storyboard of their best understanding of the customer's journey and kind of the problems they face. And most importantly, what does the end result look like? What does success look like for them? Not talking about you use this feature to get there, but just here's the context in which you have this problem. Here's the problem. Here's what it looks like to succeed. And then we show it to them and we say, does this resemble what you experience? And multiple times we've had this whole, months long kickoff. We're gathering all the stakeholders. Everyone says this is the problem. We go to the customers. Week 1, day 1, interview 1, they tell us, no, this is not the problem. This is not how we think about it. We didn't even get to the solution yet. We didn't ask them, is this how you want to solve the problem? Because now we know it's not the right problem anymore. And we spent like an hour doing a storyboard and 45 minutes talking to one person. We talked to a second person. Same thing. This is not what I think about when I think about problems. This is not important for me to solve. It's not that you're solving it wrong. It's that I don't care. And you do this, for a week. You talk to 5 people, 10 people. You get qualitative feedback, not numbers. The numbers don't really matter at this point. You just get feedback that's like, you're wrong. I don't care about this. And as a designer, I love hearing that. I honestly, when people tell me, this is fine, like this is good, I would use this, I feel like I didn't explain clearly enough what it is that I want to do.
Yeah.
What I want to hear is, I want this to be different. What if you did this? What if you solved this? I want to hear people embrace their inner problem solver. And I think that's something that a lot of designers have been trying to do. Participatory design is not new, but it's hard. And this is one of my kind of fundamental foundational beliefs, that people are problem solvers. Everyone is an expert in their own pains. No one sits around going, oh, if only a product were to be created and marketed to me that I could buy to solve my problem. They're doing the best they can in their own context to solve the problem. So that's a really good way when you're doing kind of very early stage research of understanding how do people define their problems, their most challenging problems, and how do they define their solutions? Like, what does the end state need to look like for them? A really good source of that when I was at Bloomberg was just Google guides, Bloomberg Enterprise data license how to, and then look at all the third-party stuff people have written about how to use Bloomberg data license. It's all wrong, but the advice they give to each other gives you a sense of what their mental model looks like, and then you go back and you fix it so that they don't have to ask that question because it's in the docs or it's something that is so obvious that you can just go and do it.
Yeah, I definitely think it's great. One of the things I wanted to touch off on you mentioned there as well, just going back to the to the research side of things, it's interesting what you said about validation, and that if you want to, you can pick the 3 out that you want out of the 100 that validates your idea, etc. But I'd like to get your thoughts on. To me, totally understand where you're coming from on that, but I think then obviously it's the wrong mindset to be in. You're trying to validate your idea and push it, which you're not really doing your job properly. If that's the case, you should be looking, as you say, to challenge your idea and, oh, that's wrong. We don't necessarily want to focus on that, and look at the data and realize that, okay, that's most of the people aren't actually looking at that and don't necessarily want that. And then interesting what you said about field research and actually speaking with customers and observing them. I totally agree with that. I think it's so important. And you can find out things that, I'd like to get your thoughts on this as well, but like customers haven't even expressed or necessarily said that they wanted, if that makes any sense. And you can observe things that, as you say, that probably they can't express in the way that, and you're like, oh, what about if we did this or we did that? And certainly think that's a massive opportunity for that research. And then, as you say, you're basically around the low fidelity side, or where you're storyboarding, etc. with it's a much it's a cost effective way and a much cheaper way for us to experiment with these ideas and present them and get that real time feedback. And you see so many teams that just go and grab this stuff and build, as you've been talking about, right? And only to find out that no one uses it or it's completely the wrong thing. Like we shouldn't have even bothered doing it, right?
Yeah. I think that there's kind of a pervasive approach to, well, we can only really know if we build it. Um, I think that there are a lot of things that you will only really find out that you did it wrong after you've shipped it. It's totally true that there are things like that. It's just a very small part of the mistakes that you could make.
Yeah, and what examples would you give for those kind of things? Like, what would you categorize in that you would say, okay, these things probably do need to be shipped to be validated, or actually, to get the information we need.
One of the things that I think only really works at that scale is content design, especially when you're dealing with kind of like non-functional benefits. So this is something that I like to go back to frequently, is talking about what are the non-functional benefits of a product. So either social benefits or emotional benefits. Like I feel good about using this, or using this makes me look good in front of other people. It elevates my status. And the messaging is really hard to predict, especially in different markets. Like people are used to building things for American audiences, but even in the U.S., if you ship something for a New York-based audience compared to someone from rural Iowa, you're probably going to want a different tone of voice. You're going to want a different focus, and this is part of why you need to have diverse teams, because you need to have people who are looking at this stuff who can tell you at a glance, don't do this. But there's a lot of situations where you're going to miss it, and sending it out there, seeing how people respond to it, seeing those behaviors, I think is really important to actually understand. You will never get it right the first time. I think things like anything that's algorithm based, where you need to generate lots and lots and lots and lots of results and see how people on average behave, that is absolutely something where you need to ship, not just even necessarily a beta. You need to get that out there in public. You need to get thousands of people using it, and you need to have really good data collection. But for things like features, for things that I want people to be able to do this on my website, I think dashboards are a really good example of a situation where you don't need to ship it to a very wide audience.
Yeah.
Because every piece of research that you will read, and there's tons of research on this in very kind of professional fields like medicine, emergency medicine, especially doctors, things like that. Um, People who build apps for them think that, oh, they want data, they want a dashboard. And ask any doctor, they will tell you, I don't look at it, I don't know what this is for, it doesn't help me. This is also true in the consumer space. And this is a customer that we had who wanted a dashboard, a status dashboard for transactions. And we did a week of research. We said, no one wants this. They wanted to build it anyway. They came back to us a year later. They said, okay, you were right, we were wrong. And the solution we had them create was SMS. There's no website. You don't go anywhere. It's like, we have your phone number. If there's a piece of information we need you to know, we will just text you. Until then, assume everything is going well. So in situations like that, it's really cheap to test what you're doing without having to ship anything. Because shipping is expensive, not only because developers are expensive to employ, but also because you're doing that full rollout. You're implementing it into your product. You're breaking other things. You're creating this dependency, and there's a lot of hand wringing that happens about throwaway code. And the more difficult it is for a team to ship, there are teams that struggle to even get that twice weekly cadence of delivering value, never mind continuous deployment. The harder it is for them to do it, the more they're going to say, well, I don't want to write throwaway code. I want to get it right the first time. And then you look at
Yeah.
the roadmap, and the roadmap says you have 2 weeks to get it right the first time. Do you have time to redo it? No, because the next piece of work on the roadmap is a new feature. So what happens is you launch something, you're starting to get feedback that you did the wrong thing, and you can't do anything about it because your roadmap is full of stuff for the next feature and the next feature and the next feature, and there's no opportunity to actually act on it. So that's one of the problems that I see with a lot of the way that Scrum has been implemented on these teams is you cannot have the feedback loop in your time box only go one way through, one way around. You need to have multiple feedback loops in a single time box. You can't just say at the end of the 2 weeks we shipped, because that's not value. Value is we shipped, someone used it, and they said this is good. This helped me achieve the goal that we wanted to help them achieve. Then you're done. Then you're shipped value. Then you can move on. But you need to
Yeah.
have multiple iterations of the feedback loop within that one sprint. And that's the point of continuous integration and continuous deployment. I have not worked on many teams that are able to do it, and I have not worked on many teams that have incorporated the actual customer feedback into that loop. Because a lot of the time you'll see continuous development, but you're not getting the feedback continuously.
You're not actually improving over that period of time. You're just continuously shipping more stuff instead of actually taking on the feedback and continuing to iterate and improve that.
Exactly.
And I think it's great. It leads me on to another point as well that I wanted to discuss around kind of the tension between customers and internal stakeholders, right? Separating out those stakeholders and delivering value for customers, but then obviously internal stakeholders as well, whether that's whoever it is, like the executives, whatever of the team that you're trying to please. And you touched on it a bit earlier, but I think it links to the point you've just mentioned there as well, is that, okay, our roadmap is so packed and the expectations are so high of what we're going to deliver, then we're just continuing to deliver rather than actually taking a breath and realizing, are we actually having impact with what we're doing? Do we need to be refactoring things or improving, removing, reducing, improving, like whatever it is. And I think there's so much pressure sometimes from internal stakeholders that actually the pressure is higher from that. That means that you've got to deliver things that please them rather than the customer. But they think, those stakeholders ironically think that by doing that, you're delivering the right thing for the customer, but you're actually causing the more issues, I suppose, is the way to put it. What's your comments on that?
I mean, I've worked on teams where you've exactly described like literally what happens. There's a very high level of confidence that is not proportional to the level of clarity that exists in a system. Usually when that system is based around user proxies. And so you have someone who used to be a customer and now is an executive or a product manager or whoever, or they work in sales, and they come and say, I know what the user wants, and what the user wants is this feature. And so we are going to build it. It's going to be successful, and we're going to make tons of money. And there's no kind of iteration baked into that mental model, because the assumption is we are right.
Yeah.
And so a big part of my job is doing that kind of stakeholder alignment to help people shift from a mental model of we're going to build this thing to we're going to have this business impact. And when you start having that conversation, people kind of slow down and look at you and say, well, this is going to make us money. And they're like, how is it going to make you money? What is the behavior change that it's going to create in your customers that results in more money? The standard kind of value case that you can make is there's a behavior customers are already doing to reach their goal. That behavior is failing. There's like a problem in the way that prevents them from getting there. It means that fewer customers are going to try that behavior because it's not very successful. If you can raise a success rate of that behavior with your product, more people will do it. Like, it's not coercive. You're not manipulating them. You're not necessarily just doing ads or marketing. You're creating a better way to get to what they want. And, making money off of that. Like, every single time someone does this thing, you get some ad impressions, or they pay you, or they subscribe, or, whatever your business model is. but you need to have that theory of behavior change. Why are people not already doing this thing? What's stopping them from doing it? What's making the thing, not desirable to do? And how do we change that? And so I kind of ask stakeholders for this, and they have very rarely a theory of what that behavior change is going to be. A lot of the time, they'll just say, oh, it'll make it easier for customers to do this, or it will help customers manage something or other. And that's not a benefit. That's not a real thing. You can tell me, well, it's going to improve productivity. Okay, is it? How? How are you measuring productivity? What's the number? And what is the current impact of this problem on the productivity? It's possible that it'll improve productivity by like 5%. If you measure it, for example, in sales, the amount of time a person spends on one customer, or the amount of time a person spends per buying customer, which is a much bigger number because a lot of customers aren't buying. And so you can say that, productivity is if we decrease that number, if you need to spend less time per customer to get someone to buy something. But then you kind of get into that detail. You get into, for example, we can achieve that through lots of different ways. The framework that I really like is John Cutler's North Star framework that talks about exactly this kind of stuff, where you have that top level metric, which in this case, let's say, is number of minutes spent per buying customer. But there's so many different metrics that roll up to that. For example, increasing the ratio of customers who are buying something, or decreasing the amount of time you need to spend to go from I just came into the store, I don't know what I'm doing, all the way to I can confidently make a decision. Or you can even go and say, we don't care about the number of customers. We want to target higher value customers so that we have the same number of purchases, but they buy something bigger, something that's more expensive, something that's more profitable for us. And so kind of making the metrics more granular, you can see that already you're probably having ideas in your head. Here's how we can do this. Here's how we can do that. But all of the feature work, all of the actual ideas need to roll up to that. And when people didn't start thinking about it this way, when they just have the feature, they're going to tell you something like, yeah, it's easier to use, or it's more productive. And it's like, well, it's not. You can't tell me that it's going to be more of this or more of that, because that's not how you started thinking about it. And getting people to go back to that stage and think about, well, what is the outcome that I want out of this work, is actually, I think, the key to getting design to, have, I don't want to say a seat at the table because that's kind of overused, but to be able to be in those meetings, to be in that boardroom where the discussions are happening, because that's what they're talking about. They're talking about how do we make money, and if design can be involved in that, then you're going to get invited back over and over and over. If you're just waiting for them to tell you what the feature is, then you're going to hear about the feature a month after the decision is made, and it's going to be very difficult to go back and say, well, actually, this isn't going to help us. Because you're going to be seen as a troublemaker. You're going to be seen as, design is slowing us down. Design process, research, all of those things are making us slower at delivering features. And you have to reframe the conversation from features to delivering actual measurable value. And it's hard to do that.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it links to, I had a conversation recently with Jeff Gotthealth about the same thing around we need to measure or set like the objective around a change in user behavior, not just a random outcome, right? Where like we're just speculating on exactly what you're saying. Like how are we going to change behavior? Because that, if we know that we change this behavior, we know that it's going to result in an improvement. And so totally understand that. And definitely, certainly important that we keep it all aligned on that behavior is driving. Eventually, it's going to drive those results, right? That's the most important thing. And I think the challenge, you've raised an interesting point about getting us, you mentioned it wasn't a seat at the table, but getting into those discussions where early on, and there's alignment between the stakeholders, right? Because If there's not, we know that there's going to be, as you say, like the decision's already made. This is what we need to do. And that's where it becomes a significant problem, because we then are just continuing on that hamster wheel, if that's the way you want to put it, where we're just continuing to deliver more and more and more features, and we're not necessarily tracking that impact. How do you, well, what would be your advice in dealing with situations where it's not taken that seriously and things are just looked at? Because there's a lot of variables here, right? You talk about John Cutler's North Star, and I totally agree with that, where, okay, everything's leading up to that, and we should essentially be able to point to, okay, we're coming back to what we just discussed at the start. Why are we doing what we're doing? And this is why, and this is how it's going to impact that behavior, and this is what it's going to mean as an end result. But when you just get cut off, or for example, it's not looked at, like, what do you do there with stakeholders? Or is it simply a matter of, okay, I've tried to do what I can and explain it, but I haven't really got anywhere, so we leave it at that?
Yeah, I think that this is honestly one of the biggest powers of design that is so underused. Because exactly the same tools that we use to build products, we can use to build a better way of working. And once again, it all goes back to those feedback loops. I think that there is a tendency for every single one of these features to say, well, we are going to ship and learn. We're going to ship and learn feature 1 this sprint. We're going to ship and learn feature 2 next sprint. And when you say, well, we want to do research, you always hear, we will first ship and then we will learn. And when you ship, somehow the learning doesn't happen. And you ship the next one, and somehow the learning doesn't happen, and you ship the next one, somehow the learning doesn't happen. At the end of the year, you shipped all this stuff, and you kind of say, well, what did we actually learn? And, it's ad hoc. It's usually not well instrumented. It's usually not integrated into the way that the work is planned. Most likely, it's like you check it once a year, and that sets up the next year's roadmap.
Yeah.
So I think that rather than focusing on the future, because honestly, it's very easy to talk about the future. I can say, yeah, we have confidence because we talked to a couple people. This is going to double our revenue. It's like, okay, go for it. That sounds great. Built this, but it's much harder for me to say, well, looking at last year's roadmap, we doubled revenue. The things that we did, the things that we built had this impact, because it's kind of, you can't make it up. It is what it is. And so if you don't have feedback loops that are tight enough, do your best with the data that you have. When you have someone telling you, we're going to build and then learn, well, you can say, well, we didn't do it last time. And we didn't do it the time before that. And we didn't do it the time before that either. If you have someone telling you, we're going to do the idea and then we're going to validate it, then did you validate it last time? If someone tells you, we're going to build this thing, it's going to be awesome, it's going to increase our NPS score by 5, ask them, last time you did this, did it work? Like, what was the impact, not of your next feature on the roadmap, but the previous feature on the roadmap and the one before that? And you're probably going to hear like, oh, I don't know. Or they'll kind of, mince words and come up with something. But for me, that is a very underrated part of what design does, which is it's not just doing things that are forward-facing. It's also, in a way, and this is really, I think, the power of user research, is you're the custodian of the knowledge that the organization has about what has been done, what has been learned, what has been tried. And this, to me, is why I think the build, measure, learn never really works. It's because you don't need to build before you can measure and learn. Unless you are truly starting from zero, the company will have tried to build something in the past. And you should always start by measuring that, learning from that, and then taking those learnings into the new iteration. And sometimes it's going to be about the same feature. Sometimes it'll be about a different feature. But one of the things that you can learn is, did it actually work? And if it didn't, try to figure out, why didn't it work? Why did we build something? Why did we believe at the time that it was going to be successful.
Yeah.
Because I don't think people are stupid. I don't think people build things because they think that they're going to fail or because they didn't think about it. At the time that we decided to assign, 2 or 3 developers, each of whom is paid 6-figure salaries to work on this thing for a year, we thought that we would make our money back. And it seemed reasonable enough to kind of get the approval for that. And now looking back, we might not feel that our investment was justified. And try and figure out what made us confident that it would be, and how can we avoid creating that false confidence this time around. So designers kind of need to become archivists and historians, and all of that is political. No one likes to say, well, we messed up, we launched this, it was crap. You kind of need to read between the lines. You need to talk to all kinds of people. You need to gather data in formal and informal ways. But I think that's what it comes down to, is you need to create a body of evidence that proves that the way we're doing things today is not working.
Yeah.
Because if you don't have that, you will never drive change. People will say, well, the way we're doing things right now is working perfectly fine for me because I'm, a senior product manager, or I'm like a principal developer, and I get paid a lot of money, and I get to do this job, and I'm good at it. I'm used to it. I've been here for a long time. This person's coming in trying to change things. Well, what's in it for me? And the answer is, I will help you become more impactful. I will help you get better in your work. I will help you get more recognition. It's once again coming back to those benefits. They're emotional and social benefits of making those changes. If you can't articulate them, you will never get change.
Yeah, that's what I was going to jump into, and that's great. I appreciate that, and that's where we've talked about like the difference between outputs and outcomes, right? And then that those changes, and that's a big part of it. But how do you measure that? And like, so we talk about, okay, measuring the impact and obviously doing the research, that part of thing. But when we're looking, especially in hindsight, right? And I agree with you in regards to, it's much easier to predict the future because we can throw sometimes wild things out there and that we can make up reasons or find reasons why we think it's possible, right? A lot of the time, most often, we fall short of our predictions. And so looking back, I agree. But how do we, when we're talking about, or how would you recommend when we're talking about, we want our outcome to be a change of behavior, and, we want it to obviously then eventually end up in results for the business. But how do you measure that impact? Simply for someone listening, that's listening to this, that's going, okay, well, I understand what you're saying, but how do I practically do that? What would you say?
I think that is a very difficult question because it's the question that essentially makes or breaks your business. The problem with things like NPS or CSAT is that they're extremely generic. People are really looking for that best practices answer. Is if you do this one thing, if you create this magic number and you make sure the magic number is high instead of low, you will make buckets of money. Unfortunately, that doesn't exist. Um, every single piece of this kind of decision making, this again goes back to the North Star framework, it has to be custom for your business. You need to understand, how does this business actually make money? What makes us different from our stakeholders? So there's this concept of sorry, no, it's not a concept. It's the Foundation of Business Strategy by Michael Porter. He has this one sentence. It's, what can we profitably offer, which customers need, and which competitors will find hard to imitate? And that's his definition of kind of, that's a successful business. If you can do that, you can do those 3 things, you're in the money. You're gonna make cash. There's no generic answer because of that last piece. What will competitors find hard to imitate? If there's a best practices thing, if there's a magic potion that I can sell you, well, everyone's going to have the same thing. You're going to create a commodity. You're going to drive prices to as close as possible to cost because everyone's going to be offering the same thing. And so, for someone trying to drive this kind of change, I think that's what they should focus on. Everyone says designers need to learn to code. Designers don't need to learn to code. It helps in the high fidelity stage of things, but I think designers should, should learn business administration. They should learn how a company works, not necessarily, I mean, their company, of course, but also just a company. You don't need to go to Harvard for that. You can go to like a community college, get some like night classes in. The foundations of business administration are fairly straightforward. Um, but you need to adopt the language, you need to adopt the mental model of how does this company actually make money? What are the behaviors that drive us to get a profit? What do we want our customers to do? Then you need to find the overlap between what do we want customers to do and what do customers want to do, because there's a lot of leftover thinking from the kind of design thinking era, 2010 to like 2020, like late 2010s. And there was a belief that, well, if we just make delightful experiences, somehow we'll make money. And the answer is no. There's lots of extremely delightful websites that died because they didn't make any money. And there's lots of terrible websites like, Salesforce. Everyone hates it, but it's a very, very profitable company. Jira, same thing, because they were able to find that overlap, that viability between where are we serving a need and where do we want to profitably play. I think there's a third piece there, which goes back to our behavior change, but this time facing the organization. And that piece is, once again, what can we profitably provide? Are we actually, with our internal behaviors, able to satisfy the need that we identified in that overlap? So it's kind of a three-way Venn diagram. And I think that if you want to drive concrete change, and you're looking at what we tried before and where we failed, look at that. Look at, why was this not successful? I think it's really easy as a designer to come into a new company and be like, oh, everyone here is stupid except me. You have never heard of design systems, you have never heard of whatever. Or as a product manager, you come in, oh, you guys don't have 2-week sprints, you don't have Jira, you don't have story points. I'm just going to do all of that. And doing those best practices will make us successful. Well, it's most likely you're not the first person who has thought of doing that. You're not the first person in the company who is like, oh, we should talk to our customers to come up with what we need to do. That's not a new idea. It's been around for decades. People have done documentaries about this, written books about this. You need to know before you set out on this course, what happened last time that was tried, and why did it fail, and how do we not fail?
Yeah.
Like, what's the thing we need to do differently? I think if you do that, if that's how you lay out your plan of, here's the goal that everyone already knows about, people already value it, the same way that your customers already value the goal they're trying to achieve, your internal customers, your stakeholders, also have a goal they're trying to achieve. And they have a lot of pain points on the way to that goal. Find out what those pain points are, and then pitch design or pitch your change as the thing that will get around that specific pain point. Be as specific as possible for your context, and I think you can have a chance of making a change.
Yeah, definitely. And I think I totally agree with what you've said. I think a big part of it is, like we've touched off on a little bit, but around having practical experience. And you've talked about in business administration, but also just practical experience with whatever product you're working with, whatever business you're working with, is as a designer, a researcher, whatever. I think across the board, I think it's super important for you to understand the business and the actual product or the service, whatever they're offering in detail. And then the customers, because without that, how do you come up with, without lack of a better term, but practical solutions, things that actually solve real problems? And as you said, there's products out there that have been built immaculately, or like they look amazing, right? They're incredible, but they actually are just a waste of time. Like they don't do anything for anyone, which eventually means they become obsolete. And there's others, which you gave those examples around, that probably aren't so great, right, in regards to the actual design side, but they're functional is the way to describe it. They're easy, easy to easy solving a problem, right? They may not do it necessarily in the most best looking way, or the most intuitive way necessarily, but I totally agree. And I think a lot of that comes back to, okay, do you actually understand what you're trying to solve, the business and everything surrounding it and the practicality to it? Or are you just coming up with random ideas and random things that you're just throwing things at the wall and hope it will kind of stick, right? And we'll just, don't worry, we'll just ship it. We'll see if it works, and if it doesn't, we can fix it later. But then, as we've touched on that as well, that not often that happens, right? Because we're just continuing shipping new things. I want to touch off on a final thing just here around, you've mentioned, the relationship with developers, and how do you maintain that and get their buy-in on their side, right? Obviously, you've got to, we're all one team, right? And we've got to work together at the end of the day for the greater good. And, a rising tide lifts all boats, right? If we're not in harmony, and actually, it doesn't mean we don't challenge ideas and things like that. That's not the point. But we need to be in a team where we're all working towards the greater good. So does it come back to that North Star again, really, from the project perspective, where everyone's aligned, okay, well, this is what we're trying to achieve. Now, whether it's design, development, research, whatever it is, we're heading towards that. So, if we all agree on that, then what am I doing in my role to move towards that? What would you say on that?
So I think that you've kind of really hit the nail on the head. It's the definition of a team is shared goals and shared methods. So you need to all be working towards the same goal. And a lot of the time, people don't really know what the goal is. I think that's where the North Star framework really helps, because it shows you how your work bubbles up to the kind of the top line item. It's if we ship this feature, it's going to help people do this 5 seconds quicker. If they do it 5 seconds quicker, they're going to make 5% more purchases. If they make 5% more purchases, we make 5% more money, and that means we get more bonuses at the end of the year, or we get promoted, or whatever. When everyone understands how their work fits into the big picture, they're all going to be thinking about how do we do the best we can to make that impact. When you have your definition of success set as we shipped, then you can't get that, because everyone's understanding of, well, what are we shipping is going to be different. And you're going to be pressured from all sides to cut corners, to kind of walk back your promises, to compromise, so that at the end of the sprint, or at the end of the year or quarter, or however you measure it, there's something in production with the same name as what you promised. It's not necessarily got the same features. It doesn't let people do the same thing, but it's got the same name. You can claim that you did it. That is a really depressing way of working. All of your best people are going to quit, and all you're going to end up with is people for whom ship this thing is sufficient motivation. And that's really where you get that horse trading of, we're going to solve these technical problems, we're going to solve these product problems, and the customer is kind of left out of it. Because in that framing, there's no place for the customer. There's no sense of, if we do this thing for the people who buy this, it'll be good for us. Because your contribution ends at, we shipped it. And that's not a great way of working. So I think that what you said exactly makes a ton of sense. People need to be working as a team towards a specific outcome. And before you've even decided what the outputs are going to be, you need to have that outcome defined as a team. And for me, that means doing the research together. A very standard approach that I've adopted in the past is doing a research sprint, where you do a 2 or 3 hour workshop to kind of set up your research plan for the week with all the stakeholders. So all the developers have to be there, and they have to participate, which is important. They can't just be on their laptop. All the executive stakeholders have to be there. Getting the C-level people, even if it's for the first half an hour, getting them to articulate the vision with everyone in the room buying into that articulation, and being able to ask questions and find details. And so you've done that. Then you build a research plan. What are our assumptions? What is foundational to the thing we're delivering? What do we need to know? When you've done all that, you can go talk to people. I don't think you have to have everyone participate in the user research interviews. you can. I think it's really valuable. Um, it can be difficult to get everyone to participate. Even if you can get people in one interview, it's really useful. But for me, the way that I make sure that everyone is on board with the findings is the synthesis at the end. So we put together all of the things people have said. We break it out into sticky notes. And the important thing is the sticky notes need to have context. It's not just like, here's a sentence, because you're going to forget where the sentence is from.
Yeah.
So we do the sticky notes, and then we kind of cluster them. There's a methodology for this called contextual design. It's actually you can find it online for free. It's like a whole book on I think it's the interactiondesign.org site. But if you just Google contextual design, you'll find it. And it's a really good methodology for organizing this kind of stuff, because it helps you understand what the data is telling you, not just pick out keywords. I see people do a lot of keyword based work where they'll do a word cloud. They're like, people want user experience. And so they'll take all the sticky notes that say user experience and they put it in this one bucket, but that doesn't tell you anything.
Yeah,
Like
100%.
50 people said the word user experience. Well, who cares? You need to read those things yourself, and that's where I make everyone come in. It honestly takes about half an hour per hypothesis. I usually run 3 per week, so it's an hour and a half. Everyone comes in, everyone reads the evidence, and everyone essentially sorts it into buckets of what like um, what are people saying the same thing about? Where's their kind of agreement? And then you cluster that, and then it rolls up into a summary statement, and the summary statements can kind of cluster together. And then you figure out, well, what are we going to do about this? Does this confirm our hypothesis? Does it confirm it in some cases and reject it in other cases, which is going to be the key, like most of the time, it's true sometimes, and it's not true other times. And you have to make a conscious decision as a group. Are we willing to play in this space, knowing that, for these cases, it's not going to work. It's not going to work with this type of customer. It's not going to work, this time of year or in this geographic region. And that's really where the executives need to make that call is, are we willing to play with these limitations? Or it's like, well, this only helps 10% of our customers. This is not the most important thing we need to be focusing on.
Yeah, no, certainly. I think there's, I think there's a lot of great stuff there as well, and I agree. We've touched off on a lot of things, and a lot of different, a lot of different areas for people where there's a lot of good advice in there as well, and I appreciate the discussion and wrapping it up. It's just so important that the research is done, the alignment's there, and that we actually are trying to solve real problems that are actually going to have a real impact rather than just something that we think we need to be doing. So I appreciate your time and appreciate what you've shared. I do have, a finale segment that I do with each guest. So I'd love to jump into that now, if that's okay with you, and just go through each one of those questions. So the first one is, what's one thing you believe businesses are not paying enough attention to right now that will be critical in the next 5 years?
So I think that businesses right now are chasing the AI genie. Everyone is doing it. We're already starting to get a sense that this investment is not paying off. We're starting to see, there's the Goldman Sachs report that came out and made huge waves that the majority of generative AI investments, they stop at the proof of concept stage. And I believe there was an Australian agency actually that did a test of, will generative AI help us summarize, I think it's like petitions to the government. And they found that no, it actually creates more work, because people will then need to go over every single one of those things and make sure that in like the 11% of cases that it gets it wrong, they've corrected it,
Yeah.
which actually it takes more time than just humans doing it by hand. And so I think there's this kind of Hail Mary where everyone going all in on automation, thinking that it's going to solve their problem. And as a result, they're neglecting the fundamentals. They're neglecting the actual way that their company is supposed to work. They're trying to use technology as a patch for the inefficient knowledge management and the inefficient communications inside of their company. And I think that in the next 5 years, you're going to see the companies that attend to the foundational work rise head and shoulders above the companies that don't. Because if you just try to use Gen AI as a patch for your knowledge base being very difficult to use or inaccurate or not up to date or fragmented, you're not going to get nearly as much value out of that as just fixing your knowledge base.
Yeah,
And when you
agree.
fixed your knowledge base, you don't need Gen AI anymore because people can actually use it now. So I think that all the companies that will take 5 years to realize that will be 5 years behind the companies that just fix the thing in the first place. A lot of people, they added a chatbot that's like, ask me and I will give you the answer to your question. But the answer to the question is already on the website. So you just created a second interface that has the same information as the first interface. Just fix your first interface. Just make a website that works. And that all goes back to information architecture. Jesse James Garrett's famous diagram, with the different layers of what a website contains. You need to fix the foundational layer. You need to fix the content. You need to fix the information architecture, and everything flows from there. If you're trying to fix those problems at the UI layer by putting a chatbot in instead of a website, you're just going to have two bad interfaces instead of one good one.
Yeah, no, interesting. I like it. So the second one is, what legacy do you want to leave in your industry? How do you hope your work will influence or shape the future?
So this is something that I've been focusing on in my writing this year. It's that approach that I mentioned around using design methods to improve the practice. So I really think that design is a very special kind of way of looking at the world. It's not primarily visual. The visuals are in service to kind of that design futures piece, to being able to quickly catalyze discussion by creating a visual that models what's going on and saying, what if things were this way? And yeah, a lot of the time people are going to be like, no, it's crap. And the conversation around why it's bad is what catalyzes, further development. There's a reason that we talk about design thinking and user-centered design. We don't say product management thinking. We don't say developer thinking. It's because the design process, that set of feedback loops, that set of try something and see what happens, try something safely so that when you're wrong, you're not causing damage, you're not costing a lot of money to your organization. That mental model is the valuable thing about design. And you can apply that to creating the environment where design is valuable, to creating the environment where you can do that sort of experimentation. So I think that if there's one thing people take away from my entire body of work, if that thing is I can use the skills that I have not only to make beautiful, delightful, usable products, but also to create new ways of working, to create better ways of working, to create a practice to make the people around me better at delivering that thing. I think if people can take that away and if people can successfully apply that, I would be very happy with my impact on the field.
Awesome. It's inspiring. So the last one is, if you could go back in time, what advice would you give to your younger self at the start of your career?
Ooh, that's a hard question. I am pretty happy where I've ended up. I think that, in all of these scenarios, like you go back in time, do things differently. Well, I wouldn't necessarily be where I am today. I think a lot of what I've done that felt like a mistake at the time, for example, going into startups where I was the first designer before I really got a good sense of what it was like to do design. I didn't really have a mentor. I didn't have a structure. I had to figure things out for myself. Not necessarily the most efficient way, but I think it gave me a good perspective on, well, what do I actually want out of doing design? Not what someone else tells me to do, but what do I want? So I think one thing I would tell the younger me is start with the impacts. So kind of the lessons that I've learned more recently, if I can just send them back in time, if I can just leapfrog that and start from where I am now rather than from where I was 10 years ago or 15 years ago, I think that would be my point. Start with the impacts and figure out how to get there rather than focusing on what feature are we going to deliver, and start small. I think is you have to take people with you when you're going on that kind of journey of doing something differently. People are reluctant to make big jumps. You can talk a big game. You can say, hey, if we head out onto this path, we will eventually get to this awesome outcome. And in fact, people won't come with you unless they believe that the outcome will be awesome. But the first step has to be very small. It has to be something they understand, and they have to kind of see your thought process. My thought process is not always the most linear and the most easy to understand. Um, and I think that's why people accuse me of being, oh, he's so like academic and so abstract. And that's one thing that I would tell myself, when I was starting out, is you need to help hold people's hand to get them to take that first step. The first step has to be small, but you need to create that vision of this is the direction we're headed in to get buy-in.
And get the buy-in, yeah, and there we go, to get the buy-in, and then we can go from there. Well, awesome. Thanks, Pavel. It's been a great chat. I've really learned a lot, and I think we've covered off a lot of topics for those listening, and a lot of learning lessons here. We could go on for a long time, as we discussed. There's a lot to be discussed here as well, and I really appreciate your work and your content, and I follow it closely. So to anyone listening as well, you can go follow Pavel on LinkedIn, Medium. You've got a lot of different spots, but you just look up his name, you'll find the content, and definitely give it a follow because it's well worth following. And appreciate the chat. You can also go and check out other episodes on the YouTube channel or on our Learning Center as well. There's some other great episodes and content there. So appreciate your time, Pavel. Great conversation, and thanks once again for coming on.
All right, thanks for having me. I enjoyed our chat. Looking forward to seeing this go live.
Thank you.